Today, we have the pleasure to speak with Michele Zanini, a great expert in corporate operations and co-founder of the Management Lab. His main expertise is in building organizations that are fit for the future. He used to be an associate partner at McKinsey and a leader in the firm's organization, strategy, and financial services practices. Michele Zanini, welcome and thanks so much for your time.
Hey, Boston, thanks for having me. I'd love to be here.
Michele, would you be so kind and give our audience a brief background about you and your career?
So I'll try to make this quick, Boston, but I've always been passionate about organizational performance. I started working and looking at this particular factor in the mid-90s with my first job at the RAND Corporation, which is a public policy think tank. We were looking at terrorist groups and how they were evolving from vertical by bureaucratic kind of models to more networked and lateral models, and how that was enabled by technology. And then I followed that kind of lead and really focused on topics around the intersection of technology, organization, and strategy at McKinsey. And then, for the last 11 years, I've had the pleasure and the privilege to work with Gary Hamel on these topics. And we are really passionate about building organizations that are fit for the 21st century, that are more resilient, creative, and filled with people with a lot of passion. And so that's what we do. That's the research we conduct. That's the work we do with clients. And we've written a book about that, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, in your book, Humanocracy, which you co-authored with Gary, you claim that there is something fundamentally wrong with the way so many companies and organizations around the world run their business. What exactly is that? And what do the data from the present corporate world show?
So the premise of the book is that organizations are running a management technology that is outdated. And so it's weird maybe for some people to think of management as a technology, but it very much is. It's the tools, the routines we use to accomplish together as human beings what we can't accomplish by ourselves. And so we call it the technology of human accomplishment. And it has gone through a set of evolutions. And in a way, if you look at an organization, large organization in 1910 versus a large organization in 1960 or 70, it's a massively different kind of organization. There are new roles, new functions, new structures, new processes, things like strategic planning, like training and development, like capital allocation, research, budgeting. Those things were all invented by people trying to figure out how do we create efficiency at scale and solve these kinds of problems so we can be large and complex operations. And that's all good. And it gave us a tremendous amount of productivity growth, of wealth, and we're all much better for that. Our problem, at least the problem we talk about in the book, is that we haven't been as innovative in management in the last 20, 30 years as we had been in the past. And that's a real problem because the world has changed dramatically, right? So yes, you need to be efficient, but efficiency and discipline is basically table stakes. It's what you need to even to want to compete. The way you unlock value is by unleashing the collective intelligence of everybody in the company and potentially partners outside it. It's by being deeply innovative. And so not just having one innovative product, but creating capacity to be innovative over and over, a serial innovator, if you will. And then it requires a capacity to intercept the future, to be resilient, right? To not be always like reactive to what's happening, but anticipating it and driving towards it. And we think that most companies, because they run on this outdated management technology, are not as capable. They're not as resilient. They're not as innovative. They're not as capable of unleashing the potential inside them. And that has a real cost. We can get into it, but it has real cost for the organization itself, because often it just doesn't perform. It has a cost for the people inside them, because they're just unable to flourish as individuals working. And it has a cost for society, because at the end of the day, an economy is made up of lots of firms, and if they're just not as productive as they are, then you're just not going to get a productive economy. So that's kind of the basic, and we can get into the statistics if you want examples, but that's the basic premise, that we just need to commit ourselves to building organizations that, instead of maximizing conformance and compliance, they maximize contribution.
What do you think are the main reasons bureaucratic phenomena have flourished in our organizations to such an extent over the past decades?
So maybe we could spend a second just defining what we mean by bureaucracy, because it sounds maybe old-fashioned for some people, like bureaucracy. So, it's like a horsepower, right? This kind of sounds like a relic of a bygone age, and in many ways it is, right? But it's still very much with us, right? Because if you just ask people, how would you represent your organization? Like, if you had to draw a picture of your organization, what would that look like? And I think most people would either draw a pyramid, or they would draw like lots of boxes, tied together with lines, and there'll be lots of layers. And that in a way is the exoskeleton of bureaucracy, that formal structure that defines the organization and roles within it. And it's one where power is vested in particular positions, where it trickles down. So the big leaders appoint the little leaders, right? Where people compete with one another to not necessarily to add value. That they may need to do some of that, but it's really to get promoted. There's like a progression you need to make to succeed in your career. And beyond the structure, there are a set of processes, very kind of calendar driven, very formal processes around budgeting, around strategy, around performance review, right? And all those things are essentially the infrastructure of a bureaucratic organization. And so while some companies may be more or less bureaucratic, you find these characteristics pretty much everywhere. I mean, as soon as you go beyond a certain size, as soon as you go beyond a little startup or a small proprietorship, you will start to get these kinds of things, right? And as I said before, they do have a benefit, right? But as we talk about in the book, there are better ways, right, to get concerted action and coordinated action within a company at scale, right? And so we can get in maybe into the alternatives later. But the reason why it still persists, there are several. One of them, as I said, it kind of works, sort of. So it's not a total, so our organizations are able to kind of still function, even though they're not as capable. So, they still operate at 50%, of full potential as opposed to 100. So it's maybe good enough to survive. Second, it persists because it's so familiar and ubiquitous. Like, you can't even imagine an alternative. Like, it's like a fish swimming in the ocean, right? They don't know there's water all around them. They've never seen anything different. They don't even know what a different experience might look like. So that's like the ubiquity of it makes it difficult. The third thing is that, it affects, shifting away from bureaucracy means redistributing power in an organization. And so people with power may not be so excited about giving that up, right? It's in the US, you have the saying, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Similar kind of logic, right? You just like, or telling LeBron James, hey, LeBron, you're great at basketball, but we now want you to play volleyball, right? He's not, why would he do that? So the power dynamic is an important obstacle. And then there's a practical one, which is like, how do you get started? Like, okay, you might, if you read our book, you'll see some stories like Hire and Birdsong and others, and they seem like science fiction to you. And so even if you wanted to, make a step towards those kinds of models, where do you start? Where do you begin? How do you sequence this? How do you do this in a way that doesn't blow up? So those are some of the reasons, right? So basically it kind of works. It's ubiquitous. That's the mental model everybody operates with. They're like, there's no alternative. It touches on power issues, which are pretty sensitive and resisted by people who have done well by the status quo. And, the migration or the journey towards an alternative is to a lot of people sounds daunting. I don't think it is, but they might struggle with it.
So humanocracy is something that would replace the bureaucracy. What does an ideal organization of the 21st century look like through your humanocratic lens, so to say?
Yeah, right. I would say, boss, that in the book we have plenty of examples of companies. So as I mentioned, like a Hire, Nucor, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, a bank in Sweden, the Svenska Handelsbanken, that has branches all over Northern Europe. Vinci, which is a major construction company. So we have lots and lots of different examples from different industries, different countries, different business models. And they do have some practices that, group them together, bring them together. So they all have units that are very small. So they've disaggregated the organization to lots and lots of small and nimble operating units. They have very few layers. At Hire, which is the appliance maker, they have two layers of management between the CEO and the frontline employees in their Chinese operations, which is 60,000 people. So 2 layers between CEO and frontline, 60,000 people. So it's, and the way they do that, by the way, is that instead of having lots of managers and administrators do the work of managing and administration, they syndicate that role to and those tasks to everyone in the organization. So everyone spends a little bit of time doing what otherwise a full-time manager would do. So that's why their managerial footprint is much smaller. The frontline teams are not only small, but they're also self-managing. So they have the tools and the autonomy and the incentives to run their own business in a way. Influence and leadership is really the product of peer-attested competence, and value added. So it's not like whether the way you advance, and they still have layers, they still have roles, but the way you become a team leader is because people want to follow you, not because someone else, which is more senior than you, appoints you to that position, right? So the way promotion and advancement happens is quite different. Correlation, compensation is very much correlated with impact. In a lot of these firms, people are paid based on results. Often they have lower base salaries, but bigger bonuses. And in most, since these are well-performing companies, in most years, if not all the years, they do better than their industry peers. Roles are pretty flexible and really built on capabilities as opposed to, people being slotted into roles. So those are some of the features, right, of these companies. And we can kind of unpack them more if you want. But the more important thing that we, take pains to discuss in the book is that you should learn not only what these companies do, but how they think, right? Because the way they arrived at their model was through a belief that they needed to operate with different set of principles than the bureaucratic principles. And so, what they did is they had a completely different starting point or worldview, right, about the role of individual in an organization, how value gets created. And if you want, I can kind of unpack that a little bit next. But anyway, that was just some thoughts for you on what makes these companies different in practice. But I'd like to maybe at some point tell you a little bit more about these principles.
Absolutely. Unlearning the way we organize people at work seems to be the obvious way to go, but also a lot easier said than done. Let's say I'm a newly appointed CEO at a mid-sized company with a mandate to humanocratize the way business is done in the company. Is there any kind of a step-by-step to-do list I could start with and be helped with?
Yeah, there is. Well, first of all, change starts with you as an individual. So like, it'd be interesting to know where the mandate comes from. Does it come from your heart? Does it come from your conviction that we just need better organizations? Our stakeholders need better organizations. Our employees need better organizations. I found that CEOs that are able to drive this kind of transformation really start there, right? Because if they don't feel it, if they don't feel this is a personal mission of theirs, it's not going to go very far. If they're driving it now, we can maybe come back to this as well. There are ways to drive it from the bottom up, but we're talking now about the CEO. So I think that's really important. The other thing, and by the way, so that means, really be convinced about it and developing that sense of that this is a part of your purpose, part of your legacy as a leader, right? You want to create an organization that is far better than the one you inherited. And then, there are things you can do certainly to role model this. You can start to share your power with people in the organization, not only your EVPs, but others, and be quite open and transparent about, what am I doing that, is not about adding value, what gets in the way of your progress, and so on. And, the magic now of technology allows us to have these conversations, even if not everybody's in the same place, to have a large scale and really make them quite transparent and robust. The thing that in that vein that we talk about in the book, and we practice with and help companies with who are interested in this kind of journey, is that you basically make the change process towards a humanocracy socially constructed, right? So what that means is that you invite people to be part of the journey of change in the company. So this is very different from the traditional change program, which is very top down, very regimented. And you're just, you figure everything out at the top, and then you roll it out to the rest of the organization. You cascade it. We say it in English, which is, to me, it's like a terrible word because it just reinforces this very hierarchical top-down approach to change. But instead of doing that, what you do is that you open up a conversation. And I'll give you this example. This comes from Adidas North America, their CEO. And it's, Adidas North America was about 3,000, 4,000 people who were salaried employees, and then they had some retail employees. But our initial work was with a salaried employee. So not a huge firm, but not small either. And they had been struggling with margin and with growth in North America for several years. And this CEO who came on board and was appointed from another part of the Adidas group basically realized that, to make the company more performing, they needed to make the company more innovative. And to make the company more innovative, they needed to create an organization where innovation was encouraged as opposed to, stifled, right? And he realized, if we want to create an organization that is more innovative, we need to open it up to people and have them be able to contribute in all sorts of ways. And so if that's the organization we want to build, and that with people that are kind of participating in the innovation process, then we need to make the change process as open and as innovative. So what he did, he basically said, we helped, create an online platform with some content and so on. But it was fairly simple. And the initial question was, what can we do to change the culture and the organization so that the company becomes much more innovative, right? And this was like a process over several weeks, about 8 to 12 weeks, where every week there was a different topic or a different thing that we asked the community to participate. And by the way, everybody was invited. You didn't have to do this, but you're like, this is, the way this was positioned was, this is your chance to reinvent the company, to build a company for the future, right? So, consider this a big opportunity to reshape your work environment. So we basically had a stage process where every week we had a different topic or question we wanted to address. The first one was, what gets in the way of innovation? What are the big blockers to innovation within Adidas North America? And so there was a survey that was open to everyone, and you could see the results in real time. And then there were discussions, and the CEO got on online forums, and we had a Q&A with him where he played back the results. So it was like completely open. We were like, airing our dirty laundry. Like, here are the things that get in the way. People are not accountable for innovation, or there's no time to innovate, or we don't have the tools, right, to generate new ideas and so on. So a lot of barriers came up, and then the rest of we call this a management hackathon, and so for the rest of the hackathon, we focused on, okay, how do we overcome these barriers? So we teed up different examples, different principles that we talk about in Humanocracy on a weekly basis. So for instance, one of the principles in Humanocracy is markets. Right. So markets are amazing at allocating resources very flexibly. They're great at aggregating the wisdom of the crowd. And so the question we posed to people was, and we had some examples of companies that do that. One of them is Hire, the appliance maker that has kind of internal market for resources, which we can get into if you want. But the basic idea was, how do you take this principle and reinvent our management processes and practices? So quick example, resource allocation. in most companies, it works like the way it worked in the Soviet Union, right? Where it's like top down, yearly cycles of budgeting and resources with all sorts of issues that are related to that, which we don't have to get into. But one team said, of participants said, well, we should be a little bit more like Silicon Valley and have multiple sources of capital. So if one funder says no, maybe another one might say yes, and this idea might get traction somewhere else in the organization. Or another team said, well, we need to create a more democratic approach to resource allocation, like a Kickstarter. I don't know if you're familiar with Kickstarter, but it's a crowdfunding platform where people put up projects and the community funds them. Yeah. So they said, well, we should do this within Adidas North America so that it's more democratized, it's more flexible, it's more open, more participatory, and so. So you can imagine we went through this process where we generated ideas of this kind. We ended up getting like almost 10,000 ideas over several weeks, and then we asked the community to prioritize these. We ended up, long story short, we ended up with about 20, which then got turned into experiments. So take the crowdfunding initiative. We didn't say, okay, now we got to create this gold-plated crowdfunding platform that we're going to flip the switch on a particular day and off we go. Rather, we said, let's try this in a very lo-fi way in a part of the organization, in one department with 100 people. Let's give everybody $200. Let's put up a whiteboard and sticky notes where people can propose ideas and other people can pledge money to fund those ideas. So it was done in like 30 days, very cheaply. It was a very successful effort. And then from there, you kind of learn and you scale the ideas that work, right? So it's a very long answer to your question, Boston, but I hope it was a helpful one in the sense that it shows how you can start quite practically, quite small, and you're just inviting the organization to be part of the journey with you, which helps then make it stick. And it also, as a CEO, you don't have all the burden of figuring out all the answers. Like the organization is going to help you with that. And then the other thing that is quite important is that you get the community not only to generate ideas, but to prioritize the ideas through some sort of process of peer review, and equally importantly, to be very experimental, right? So don't go crazy. Don't try this really difficult thing across the entire organization, but start small, learn and iterate, right? Which is something that we all, I think, take for granted when it comes to products and prototyping and all those things. But when it comes to management practices, somehow we think that that's not possible, but it actually is.
According to your experience, what are the main obstacles we can come across? How to overcome, for example, resistance from the incumbent structures of people? What do your surveys show in this respect? Which layers of organization are usually most problematic in this respect?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to generalize. But if I had to generalize, I would say it's not necessarily the CEO. The CEO often wants to do this. And it's not the people in the front lines. They definitely want to do this. It's the people somewhat in the middle, and it may not even be like that. It may be like upper middle, the one or two layers below the CEO, who are, who may be quite threatened by this in some way, or may not get it, or may think like, oh, there are better ways for us to be profitable and so on. The way you get around that, I think, is well, there are many strategies you can take. One is you need to start measuring the cost of the dysfunction. I mean, it's often not easy to, our accounting systems don't, they're great at measuring efficiency or inefficiency. They're not really good at measuring lack of flexibility or lack of engagement and the economic cost. So that it has an enormous cost. But it doesn't. We're now doing this interview through Zoom, right? But and it's a great product. The founder of Zoom used to be a engineer at Cisco in WebEx. I don't know if you've ever used WebEx, but it's kind of like Zoom, but not as good. And in 2011, he was desperate to upgrade WebEx and kind of turn it into a Zoom. And he begged his bosses to do this. And they said, no, we got other things we want to do. We want to work on enterprise social network and other things. So after a year, he gave up and went off and founded another company. And there was a time during the pandemic, like October of last year, where Zoom was worth almost like $200 billion in market value, which is as much as Cisco, the whole of Cisco. Okay. So in a way, these things have a cost. Like if you miss opportunities from that, your employees who are quite qualified and thoughtful are telling you should pursue, that's a cost, but it doesn't get measured no one's really accountable for that. So making people accountable for bureaucratic drag and measuring that, I think, is a very important thing you can do, because that opens people's eyes. I think it does. The other thing you should do is, when you start something like this, don't go up and to seek permission, but go sideways. Try to build a community that is more horizontal and try to make things happen there, and then build the information, the conviction, the support, so that it's really hard for people who are trying to block it to get in the way, right? And I'll just give you another very quick example. We have a whole chapter in the book about Michelin, the tire maker. They're on a journey towards creating more accountability and freedom in the front lines. But the way they did that was very clever. They have about 50 factories or 60 factories around the world, and lots of people working obviously in shifts within these factories. Their first experiments at making these production teams in the factories more autonomous were like across every single part of the company or every single factory. They said, we want volunteers from all the different parts of the manufacturing network to try this with us. And basically they found 37 teams in 17 different plants. So it's 1,500 people. I think they have about 70,000 employees in production. So it's a very small slice of the production force. But the interesting thing is that it's quite widespread. So 17 plants across the world gives you quite a great representative sample. And it starts to create the impetus for change in a very, they're like small embers, but they're distributed, right? And so then they ran these year-long experiments where these teams were trying different things. And then eventually they said, okay, we've gathered enough information. We see these productivity improvements. We see these increases in engagement from the people working in these kinds of environments. We need to kind of take the next step. So what they then did is they picked factories. Again, factories, the whole plants volunteered to then take it to the plant level as opposed to the team level. And then eventually kind of bubbled up, right? And now it's part of every aspect of what Michelin does. Now, not everybody is working and progressing at the same level, but it's a very good story, very instructive, I think, because again, you go bottom up, but also laterally, right? So, and you create this coalition for change that is very difficult to stop and argue with. So that's what I would recommend as a way to overcome these two barriers. Measure the cost and be lateral.
Is human psychology and cultural dynamics in groups of people of various sizes becoming one of the most critical things CEOs need to learn first if they want to debureaucratize their organizations?
I don't think that they need to learn first. I mean, it certainly helps to have a CEO who gets it, but I think you can get change to happen from the middle of the organization or even bottom of the organization. The Michelin example, yeah, the CEO was supportive, but it wasn't him who was driving this. It was someone who used to be a factory manager in China who came back to HQ in Clermont-Ferrand and said, we need to do better. And he basically became a bit of an internal activist. And he's the one who created the movement. His name is Bertrand Ballarin, and you can read about him. We even have a Harvard Business Review article. So I mean, it's CEO is not, it's helpful, but not necessary. But what you need to do is as someone who's fed up with the status quo and wants to light the fire inside of the company of Humanocracy, you need to overcome your learned helplessness. A lot of times we just think that all the stuff is imposed on us and there's nothing we can do, but there's a ton you can do. So I mentioned before, the kind of stitching together a lateral coalition is certainly one thing you can do. We have a great example in the book of Helen Bevan at the National Health Service, where she did exactly that to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people across the NHS, which is the health service of England, on the topic of improving patient care. And she did that without anybody's approval. And the CEO didn't even know about it until it started happening. And then he got on board because it was a great thing, right? Yeah. you can do that. And then the other thing you can do is just start where you are and start in your perimeter. Like if you're a team leader or manager of a department, there's no reason you can't experiment and try new ways of managing within that and involving your team. Start where you are and then send ripples across the organization.
What are the potential downsides of going down the humanocracy path? Is there a danger that by trying to maximize human contribution of every employee, we end up with too much chaos, like opposing interests and work results, maybe drifting away from company strategy? Can we find ourselves juggling with too many balls?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I think it's a false trade-off. Freedom and control. I mean, in a way, theoretically it is. You get to a point where maybe it does become mutually exclusive, but most organizations are so far from that it's not really applicable, right? I mean, if you look at the organizations we've profiled in the book, they're all incredibly efficient. They're incredibly high performing. So one example is Handelsbank, and so the bank. So the employees in those branches, they basically have 650 branches around Northern Europe and the UK. Their branches are responsible for credit decisions, for staffing levels, for customer care, for rates, for selecting equipment that they use in the bank. I mean, they're basically like little businesses. And you would think this is like insane in a bank, right? Because, wow, maybe they'll make stupid decisions on credit, or maybe they'll hire too many people and they'll be inefficient and so on. The reason why they don't do that, and in fact they are, not only do they have the highest return on equity of their peer group, and they've beaten their peer group 49 years out of 49 years. Like it's amazing track record of performance. But also, if you look at their cost to income ratio, which is the measure of efficiency, it's the lowest in their peer group. And their loan losses, so the write-offs from bad loans and bad decisions, they're incredibly low, right? So how in the hell do they operate so independently and at the same time with so much discipline? The reason for that is because they localize the trade-offs and the decisions to people who also have in the branches have the incentives, they have the skills, the knowledge to make the right decision. So just a quick example, they've worked really hard to make the branch essentially a P&L. In most banks, in most countries, branches are sales and marketing centers, and service maybe, if you need to kind of get a cashier's check or something, but they don't have a P&L. At Handelsbanken, they do. So if you make a loan that it doesn't do well, like, there's a default or risk of default, it's your responsibility to make sure it gets back on track. And if it doesn't, you have to write it off. You write it off in your book. You don't kick it up to upstairs to someone else. And then they have all sorts of ways to make sure that performance between branches is transparent. So they're league tables, so you can see who's doing well, who's not doing well. It creates a healthy tension. And then the other thing is that people are paid on the long-term performance of the bank. So even though they have their own little P&L, there's an element of doing what's right for the bank in the long term, because that's basically where your retirement money is, where your nest egg is, where a lot of and it could be like $1 million or more, even for like a relatively junior person. So it's a kind of long story short. What you need to do is rethink the ways you get. What these companies have done, they've reinvented the way that you get control and discipline. So you can get control and discipline with like hierarchy, top, super strict rules, and a manager kind of breathing down your neck. You can do that, but it often doesn't work. Or you can do it by saying, we have a common set of values, we have a common set of incentives. We're gonna, give you not only the freedom but the accountability for results, and we're gonna give you the information so you make the right decisions, right? And a lot of these companies have done it that way. And so what they've done is they've been able to get both freedom and control. And so you get the initiative, the entrepreneurship, the imagination you get with kind of by unleashing people, right? At the same time, you are still operating with the kind of efficiency that you need. So I think people, it's not so much the what, and it's more the how, right? It's like, how do you get control? And we're still stuck in thinking that there's only one way to get control, which is centralization, top-down supervision, and rules. And these companies show you that there's a different way, and so you can have the both end. You can in America you say you can have the cake and eat it too, right? So that's very much what these companies do.
If I'm correct, you believe in establishing like multiple small hierarchies of peer-tested competence and genuine value creation. How to prevent those from becoming too static? Is there a possibility such a constantly fluid structure results even in a more stressful working environment for people?
Well, so let me kind of maybe explain a little bit what we mean by fluid structures. So the idea isn't that you get rid of leaders and structure. Maybe some companies can operate with a much flatter structure than others, and we think we can. You can certainly do that. But the role of a leader, and by the way, by leader we don't mean like the person kind of on top of the chain or on top of you in the chain, but rather the person that catalyzes positive contribution across the firm, right? And if you take that notion of leadership, anybody can be a leader, right? And the correlation between position in the hierarchy and your ability to have an impact in the organization is not perfect by any stretch. In fact, it's probably not very strong at all. And so what we see these companies do is that they have team leaders, for instance, who are essentially accountable to those that they're leading. They're accountable to the team, and the accountability comes in part from the fact that they get appointed there by the team, or they can be removed by the team if they're not doing their job, right? So at Hire, these micro enterprises, they have a leader who can be essentially recalled as a leader. They could say, we no longer want to follow you because you're not adding value. You're not really helping us get to our next stage of evolution or hitting our targets and so on. And that way, you still have a hierarchy of sorts, but you have a hierarchy that is built on the ability of other people or the willingness of other people to follow you. And so you end up with leaders, people who are in leadership positions who are real leaders, right? Because everybody agrees, this person is really amazing, and we want to follow what he or she says. Now, leadership comes in many forms. So there's administrative competence. Can you create a good plan? Can you follow through? Can you make sure resources are properly allocated and all those kinds of things? Which is, by the way, 90% of what we think is leadership competence today. So that's part of what you need to do. But other people might be leaders in all sorts of different ways. They might be amazing with customers, or they might be amazing with new technology, creating new algorithms and the like. And so the idea that the only hierarchy that counts is managerial hierarchy, administrative hierarchy is nonsense. Like, why should managers be paid more than someone who's an amazing programmer or amazing salesperson or amazing, whatever it is? And it's not just about the compensation, but the idea is that you need to create the capacity for people to advance and feel like they're moving forward in the organization and be recognized, even if they're not, managers, right? Even if they're not managing or doing administrative work. And is this a more stressful environment? It may be more stressful. I'm not sure. I mean, if you look at the engagement statistics and the stress, and all kinds of surveys around stress at work, mental health issues and other things, we have a terrible system as it is. So I don't know if we can do worse. I don't think so. Certainly you will feel stretched. You will feel like, there's an expectation you'll evolve, you'll improve. So these environments aren't like, super happy, warm and fuzzy places, right? They can be pretty demanding, but I think most people would tell you that, at the end of the day, that's a better environment to be in, because that's how you grow, right? That's how you become a better person and a more capable human being. So yeah, I don't know. I find this notion that somehow these are, heartless, atomistic workplaces where everybody's like always trying to do work like crazy to add value. I mean, I don't think that's true.
What is the impact of the so-called societal role models onto the corporate world? The way politics works, for example, in the developed world, instances of state capture by the big corporations, aren't we absolutely drowning in day-to-day cases of the absolute opposite to what humanocracy stands for?
Yes, it is a problem. I mean, there are all sorts of facets of this, but we're seeing a ton of organizational institutional sclerosis and incompetence. I mean, in the United States, let's just you mentioned maybe the public sector or the political sphere, but I'll just give you one example. The Department of Defense spends almost $1 trillion a year on different things, acquiring new weapon systems, paying for suppliers and, whatever. It's there's a budgeting process that basically helps the department plan for all these expenses. And it's the same process that was in place in the 1960s when Robert McNamara, the then Secretary of Defense, put it together. And at the time, it was a great system, right? Because it allowed people to be very disciplined and structured, and what we were saying earlier. But it was built for a world where the enemy was the Soviet Union. There's only one enemy. The environment was pretty, the strategic environment was pretty fixed. We were competing with the Soviet Union everywhere around the world. And where things didn't change that rapidly. Yes, there might have been a crisis or two, but you knew, you were pretty confident the Soviet Union would still be our enemy, 5 years down the road, right? And so there's this a system that was created to allocate resources and plan in the 1960s is still being used today when the world is totally different, right? Who are our enemies? Technologies are moving so fast, even military technologies. And can we really, plan with this kind of very lethargic and static way? And I'm quite concerned because, the machinery, I mean, it's another example. The machinery of organization is stuck in this paradigm from 100 years ago. And the world has changed dramatically. And when it comes to political and public policy issues, it's not just that a company might not do well and the employees in that company might not do well, but we as a country, as a society, are not going to do well. So one of the things that Gary and I are pretty keen on, we're creating a little movement, a set of interviews that hopefully will be online in a few months, is to think about how do we make this a societal priority, right? How do we, change all kinds of institutions to help us, get to a new model, a new way, a new consensus on how, the role of individuals at work and how organizations ought to be run. And that includes, creating accountability for these kinds of models, even measuring it. Maybe the SEC and other market regulators need to start asking companies to report on how bureaucratic drag they have, just like they're asking them to report on environmental pollution. Maybe we need to change the business education model, and especially business schools, and teach them other things, other paradigms, right? And there are lots of things we can do, but we need to wake up and really make this a real priority across multiple stakeholders, not just the individual CEO who wants to try something different to improve performance.
For the end, would you possibly share any final thoughts with our audience, and where can our audience continue to follow you?
They can follow, I'll start with your last question first. They can go to humanocracy.com. There they'll find more about the book. They can download in English the preface in chapter 1. And there are lots of tools that you can download. There's even a course that we built. So I encourage you to check it out. It's all aimed at empowering you to be a change agent inside your organization. And in terms of final thoughts, I would say, maybe going back to what I said earlier, that, change does start with you. Don't feel like you're helpless. You can make things happen, even if you're not the CEO. You just need to, muster the kind of the motivation. This is a worthwhile problem. You need to be inspired by these models that we talk about, the Hire, the Handelsbanken, and many others, Nucor, and many others. You need to think about your own mindsets, like what needs to change in your worldview and how you behave. And then lastly, how can you start a migration, right? How can you work laterally? How can you recruit colleagues? So if a good chunk of us start doing that, I think we'll really start to make waves. So that's what I would urge our viewers and listeners to do.
Great. Michele Zanini, thanks so much for your time, and hope to see you soon at the October conference in Slovenia.
Hey, thank you so much, Boston. It was good to talk to you.